Ukraine crisis and civil war. From the past 8 years, the conflict in Ukraine is all about should it look westward toward the European Union or maintain close ties with Russia. Ukraine is a historically divided nation. They are split between the east and west. You can see that on the eastern side, there is a higher percentage of the population that use Russian as their language than the western. As a conclusion, Ukraine is largely split between the east and west. Why has that happened? Throughout the 18th century, Russian power increased in Ukraine, and they continued to take Ukraine's rich agricultural and industrial resources. Many Russian immigrants took over the land, displacing Ukrainian families who had lived there for generations. But, for a while, the Russian Empire was sick and dying. In Ukraine, national leaders saw the October Revolution as an opportunity for independence after 200 years under Russian control. Ukraine declares its independence after World War I, but that didn't last long enough to develop a Ukraine culture. In 1929, Joseph Stalin became a dictator, and he has a plan. It's called the 5 Years Plan. Stalin set about 25 million peasants' farms in Ukraine. These farms will now belong to the state, and many owners become laborers on their land, where many of them had to face with the debt. That resulted in Stalin causing 7 million Ukrainians to starve to death. In the 1940s, the Soviet Union relocated an entire Ukrainian population out of Ukraine and replaced them with Russian citizens. That's why Russia still holds a lot of influence in Ukraine. Today, Russia still loves Ukraine's resources. They want the coal, iron, and fertile in the region of Ukraine as closely connected to them as possible. This region happens mostly on the eastern side. That's why on the eastern and southern side in Ukraine dominate the pro-Russian end, where Russia holds the most influences. Began in November 2013. Ukraine's President Viktor Yanukovych rejected to join the European Union. It leads to a massive protest with tens of thousands of protesters because in western Ukraine there's a lot of pro-European. In 2014, a gunfire erupts between protesters and police in Maidan Square, Kiev, leaving a dozen of deaths. Later on, anti-government protesters ran Yanukovych out of the country. A week later, Russia took advantage of the chaos, and they sent military forces into Crimea. Russia claimed it was protecting its port to access to the Black Sea. On the other hand, Kiev's government launches its first formal military action against the pro-Russian rebels, who have seized government buildings in towns and cities across eastern Ukraine. Vladimir Putin warns that Ukraine is on the brink of civil war. Less than a month, separatists in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk declared their independence without recognizing the referendum. Fighting of two groups occurred between these contact lines. Ukrainian army moved in to take back the region, but Russia joined the separatist rebels, which led to the fierce fighting for several months. It puts 100,000 civilians in danger, and about 10,000 people have died since the conflict erupted. In May 2014, Petro Poroshenko became a new president in Ukraine, and Poroshenko signs the European Union Association Agreement. In February 2015, Russia and Ukraine decide to sign a peace agreement to stop the ceasefire. It's called Minsk II. The deal laid down for conditions for a ceasefire. It's both sides should observe a ceasefire, withdraw troops and military equipment. Also, foreign military, meaning Russia, had to leave Ukraine, but none of that has happened. Regarding the ceasefire, it is being violated each day. After Minsk II, the Russian separatist forces continue the assault on Debaltseve, led intense battles for Shirokine. In conclusion, Ukraine's National Defense and Security Council report 300 violations of the ceasefire by February 20. European Union governments have agreed to impose sanctions on Russia. Their target is on the state bank, imposing an arms embargo and the export of equipment for the country's oil industry. In response to Russia's continued backing for separatists in eastern Ukraine. But until 2018, the sanctions also caused economic damage to the number of European Union countries, with total losses estimated about $112 billion. Despite the sanctions, the crisis in Ukraine is still happening. According to the United Nations Human Rights, many rockets and artillery attacks between April 2014 and May 2016 killed over 9,000 people and injured more than 21,000, including civilians and combatants on all sides in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. They reported a 66% increase in civilian casualties from May to August compared to earlier in 2016. You can paint the Ukrainian conflict as the continuation of their independence movement and another step in the battle against Russian control. Today, the crisis and battle are still happening in Ukraine.